now we're at the point where if you hold China accountable for their cheating and trade violations, you are just a Trumpite and you're a protectionist. So he talked about isolationism, protectionism. China economy backs into the future. The state sector leads expansion even as the president lauds higher quality growth. And this was a piece in the Wall Street Journal today about what's happening in the Chinese economy. We'll get to that in just a bit. But joining us now is Matt Card. He's the executive vice president for Suniva, which is a U.S.-based manufacturer of solar modules. And he's going to be testifying before the ITC, the International Trade Commission, after the solar panel cases came to the fore in September, where both Suniva and Solar World were handed a win in this ITC injury case, which means that basically China, the way it's conducting itself in international trade, is violating, and I think it's beyond obvious, violating the 1974 Fair Trade Act, and Suniva wants tariffs slapped on Chinese solar modules coming into the United States. By the way, Suniva, I believe, is now bankrupt. Matt Card joins us now. Matt, how are you? Good to talk to you.
Good morning, Lauren. Thanks very much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to chat.
Matt, it's interesting to see the globalists rise up. Yesterday, George W. Bush, Barack Obama, both, it's seeming like a coordinated attack on the president. It was everything thrown into the mix. Because when you talk about Trumpism, which is just conservatism, always was, and up until the Bush time, that if you are interested in protecting America's interest by focusing on the American economy first, not these far-flung military adventures or these global trade deals that have done so much to harm American industry, then you're a protectionist. Tell us about what Suniva wants, needs, and how this Chinese manipulation of the solar market has hurt U.S. manufacturers.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. I absolutely agree with the comments in your lead-in. China's absolutely in an economic war with the U.S. I had to laugh at the comments a little while ago about the screaming about protectionism. This is nothing more than what President Trump has called for at the UN, which is fair and reciprocal trade and commerce, and that's what we're looking for. The issue here, I'll explain to your listeners, is over the last 30 years, China and its proxies have executed a targeted attack, economic and otherwise, through just an overwhelming flood of low-priced imports on an important U.S.-born high-tech industry, solar cell and module manufacturing. Everyone thinks of this as a Chinese industry, but the technology was actually born and developed in the United States. And over the last 5 years alone, as a result of this targeting, almost 30 U.S. manufacturers have been driven out of business, suffered mass layoffs, and crippling financial harm. This issue is not important only as a manufacturing issue, but as a growing national energy and cybersecurity issue. And the attacks absolutely continue. Even this week, another U.S. manufacturer announced that it will be closing its doors and laying off its entire staff, and it attributed the problem to that to low-priced imports driven primarily out of China and its proxies.
Now, the use of Section 201 of the 1974 Trade Act by this administration is really important for people to understand. This is where Trump fulfills his promise that he made on the campaign trail to stand up for American manufacturing by using current U.S. law that other presidents basically didn't pay all that much attention to. Tell us about the Section 201 issue. And I know people think, oh, this is too inside baseball, but it's not. This is something you really have to understand to get why Trump is rattling the globalist cage here. Remember the Bushes, their connections to China. Obama obviously presided over a ballooning trade deficit with China for 8 years, did not give a whit about China's manipulation of the market for the most part. Tell us about Section 201 and why this is so significant.
Well, you're right in bringing that up, and I appreciate that. 201 represents, I think, the appropriate tool to target what has been a very comprehensive attack. This is not something new. Prior administrations have attempted to address the issue, but they've done it through other failed policies. What 201 attempts to do, and gives President Trump the ability to do, is to protect U.S. manufacturing from not only direct manufacturing in China, but a willful cheating that has moved manufacturing around the world.
What does the cheating consist of? Just so people in my listening audience really get it.
Yeah, absolutely. If you go back a little bit in history, various attempts have been put on to try to control anti-dumping and things like that from Chinese manufacturers. What China basically did was laughed at the U.S. and said, we'll show you, and they created a global game of whack-a-mole. They started moving manufacturing locations from China to other Southeast Asian provinces. Singapore, Malaysia, Vietnam, Thailand. Countries the size of Nebraska now have more manufacturing capacity in solar than the United States of America. And their answer has been right in everyone's faces. They've been bold and loud in the press and said, hey, we're moving to these countries as a way around the tariffs put in place by the United States government. What a 201 gives President Trump the ability to do is say, enough is enough. We're going to protect U.S. manufacturing jobs. We don't care where you run in an attempt to violate U.S. law. We are going to lock this country down, and we're going to protect and create fair and reciprocal trade for American manufacturers. It's a fantastic notion.
The Wall Street Journal is going crazy about this, by the way. They can't stand the idea of any tariff being put on Chinese manufacturing, whether it's made in China itself or companies are moved over to Malaysia. They can't stand the idea of protecting American companies. You're asking what, for a 40-cent tariff on each solar module? Is that right? 40 cents a module?
A little bit lower than that.
Okay.
And without getting into the inside baseball, as you call it, there's a different tariff for a solar cell and a solar module.
Okay.
But we are asking for essentially the return of pricing to effectively early 2016, before a massive distortion caused by imports flooded the U.S.
And when they flooded the U.S., again, I hate to keep interrupting you, but I know my listeners want these questions answered. When you say Chinese dumping, explain what that means. So again, the average person who doesn't know trade policy gets this.
Yeah, fair enough. What dumping essentially means is through the use of state-supported subsidies, the Chinese government literally subsidizing manufacturers to sell product below its cost to make. We operate here in the United States in a fair market. We're expected to make a profit. Our competitors in foreign countries, particularly China and its proxies, don't have to play by those same rules. We played by the rules. China cheated through subsidies, ultimately through hacking of our partners and competitors here in the U.S., of stealing of technology secrets, and said we're going to bring products in at a remarkably low cost, irrationally low cost, and say try to compete with this, Mr. Manufacturer in the U.S.
And so you cannot compete with state subsidies that have been directed towards certain industries, and it's solar, it's steel, it's things like countertops, which they've also counterfeited. They steal technology and things as simple as Cambria quartz countertops. They've dumped cheap imports from China into this country, and it's hurting that great manufacturing company based in Minnesota. They operate on so many different levels of deception that it is hard for the average manufacturer to keep ahead of it. And what Donald Trump is saying here in the solar industry is all we want is a comparable playing field, competitive advantage. No, we're not looking for a competitive advantage. We're just not going to preside over a competitive disadvantage because of their cheating. And what is the current posture? And we have to go, but very quickly, what is the current posture of this case at the ITC? What next? Is it now up to the remedy portion of this?
Yeah, so the ITC is effectively done. The ITC viewed the case in September. They ruled unanimously that there was injury. 4-0. Both free traders, fair traders, the full range of spectrum on the ITC said unequivocally this massive imports, particularly from China and its proxies, have crippled the U.S. industry. Remedy hearings were held a week or two ago. The ITC will announce their recommendations, and by November 13th, it will be delivered to President Trump, who will make the final decision.
Awesome.
I got to say, we're incredibly heartened that we have a president now, and President Trump, who has the courage to take what you described as bold steps that says we're not going to stand for this anymore.
Well, that's not fair. That's protectionism. And Matt, that's protectionism. You're trying to wall off the country. All right, you're walling us off, and you have your solar, but China has its solar, Malaysia has its solar, and so it's one big global community. So you got to compete, or you got to get out of the business. All right, so you're just protectionist. You know, that Trumpism, that drink us down the toilet. It's like,
well, if it's protectionism, then I'm very glad we have a president now who defines that as fair and reciprocal.
Now, I appreciate it, Matt. We're out of time. Thank you so much for your perspective. A complicated topic made very easy to understand on the Laura Ingraham Show. We wish you all the best. We hope the president does the right thing on November 13th. We'll take a break. We'll close out this hour. A lot more to get to on your healthy radio addiction.